President Anthony Carmona, thank you so much for allowing us to do this interview with you.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine.
It's an important International Peace Day for many reasons. We see all of the conflicts that are plaguing the world. We see the divisions right here in the Caribbean. You've advocated for peace all of your life. That's been your life's work. What do you think on an occasion like this?
Well, one good thing about commemorating an event like the International Day of Peace is that it reboots and recalibrates our philosophies that are so important to sustain peace in viable ways. I can tell you from personal experience, I have seen what the lack of peace has done. And let me disabuse your mind immediately that the absence of war, peace is not the absence of war. Peace, in fact, goes beyond that sometimes banal description of peace. And in this regard, I think it is very important that we remember the telling words of Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, who stated that there can be no peace without development and no development without peace. Because he recognized that in the context of civil society, there was a need to ensure that the human development must not be compromised by economic development. And traditionally, as you would appreciate, whenever the United Nations celebrated the International Day of Peace, they would always call for combatants all over the world to put down their arms. And this has been going on since 1981, when the General Assembly adopted the resolution to have the International Day of Peace. Of course, perhaps a genesis of sort was what, in fact, a Japanese consular back in 1954 did by asking the international community to build a bell of hope, a bell of peace, which today, in fact, rings twice a year. And on Monday coming, the 21st of September, the International Day of Peace, that bell will be rung to remind leaders that they ought to refocus their vision to ensure that peaceful societies exist and continue to exist, because we are in a crisis of all sorts.
You say we're in a crisis of all sorts. I just wonder, this crisis that the globe is going through, what significance, or does International Day of Peace, marked on September 21st, still hold any relevance, any significance?
Well, it does, because the bottom line is that we need global leadership that encourages peace. Because what I have found over the years, that there is a crisis in global leadership. And it has to do to a large extent with the nature of leadership, because I have always advocated that service leadership must always trump power leadership. With service leadership, you would nurture and foster a philosophy of inclusivity and global solidarity. And what is taking place is that with the growth of widespread nationalism and partisan politics, you find invariably it impacts on civility, on behavioral patterns of individuals, of persons individually and collectively. And to a large extent, it can result in what I would often refer to as backward governance. Because the reality is that we need more service leadership as a conduit to sustaining a peace that is credible and genuine.
Here in the Caribbean, if you talk about the leadership within here in the Caribbean, What do you make of the leadership within the Caribbean when it comes to peace agreements? And as you said, peace is more than just the absence of war.
Well, I certainly think, for example, that within the CARICOM diaspora, that we certainly have leaders who can put their heads together to ensure the survival of the Caribbean region in these trying times. In that regard, I think in each of us, there is a fire, there's a flame of peace. The problem very often is that flame grows dim in many, and grow dim because of the obsession of gamesmanship, and because, in fact, of the proliferation of that philosophy of one-manship. Because time and time again, I am taken aback by comments I hear throughout the Caribbean region that are not inclusive, comments that are very parochial, comments that are simply not visionary and expected of the leadership that is required to take us forward in the Caribbean region. Because I can tell you, in the context of peace, one may feel that it is some kind of pipe dream. But it is important that we, and I've stated this during my presidency, before and after, it's very important that we ensure that in our curricula, on our school curricula, we do train our young people from kindergarten to tertiary level to be advocates of mediation and alternative dispute resolution. Because when you look at how, in fact, people deal with arguments, with positions put forward, it's very personalized, it's very derogatory, it's very disrespectful. And I think, in fact, the time has come for us to not attack the man or woman who is putting forward a point of view, but rather to attack his arguments. But you see, that requires critical thinking. It requires deductive reasoning. And this is why it is so important in our curricula that we engage these processes that make for a better citizen and a better global villager. Because the bottom line is that we have to concern ourselves with what is taking place throughout the world. We talk about peace, but when you have child soldiers fighting in South Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, when you have children 7 and 8 years mining cobalt for conglomerates, for multinational companies, cobalt that is used in electric cars and cell phones. This is why when I was helping launch the International Day of Conscience, I spoke of the need not only for corporate social responsibility, but more importantly, for conglomerates to have a corporate social conscience. Because I think within us, as I said before, if we follow our consciences, we will always do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And as I have lived by this mantra, and we will always, I feel if we always treat people like people, everyone, in fact, no one will be left behind. Because look at what is happening, for example, in the area of persons with disabilities and persons, in fact, who suffer from different developmental disorders. Can we really say that they're included in our society? Can we say, for example, that in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean region, disabilities and persons with developmental problems, are they really brought to the table and banquet of a nation's patrimony and a nation's resources? Able-bodied people in Trinidad and Tobago and in the Caribbean enjoy the best of the best. There is a demographic, and that I'm talking about essentially persons with disabilities, that are not given the light of day. We have, for example, ratified and signed on to the Convention for persons with disabilities. But there is no enabling legislation that provides for genuine inclusivity into our society. Our employment practices fly in the face of what is just and right for persons with disabilities. And we have to do something about that. And my concern is not something that is fly by night, because when I was at the office of the DPP, I was in fact the voluntary legal advisor to the Trinidad and Tobago Mental Retardation Board for some 10 years. So I speak from a position of harsh experience, you know. But let us get back to this whole idea of peace, an International Day of Peace. Because we see, for example, peace accords being signed by several countries with Israel, which is unheard of. So obviously, in fact, people are experiencing and appreciating the benefit of peace. You know, I remember when I officially visited Arlington Cemetery and I saw those thousands of white crosses. I remember telling my aide, who really wins a war? Because in front of me were the bodies of 17, 18, and 19-year-old bodies underground. What is the benefit of it all? And this is why, for example, peace must be seen as a mechanism to deal with crisis. That peace is in fact not emblematic of weakness, but peace is a matter of strength. That it must incorporate in our leadership, in our society, philosophies of compassion, mercy, and forgiveness. And it is only when, in fact, we engage those kind of philosophies, when we engage in what I would refer to as trickle-down economics and trickle-down humanity, then we will have a society that we can be proud of.
How do you define peace for a country like Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, peace essentially is about having the philosophical, integrated message to oneself that we are one. That no matter where we come from, we are one. And I can tell you, for example, even when I was president, the 5th president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, I never lost my sense of Caribbeanness. Because first and foremost, I was a Caribbean man. And it is this kind of philosophy that we need in Trinidad and Tobago. Because nobody is going anywhere. And the parliamentarians and the politicians need to appreciate that the parliament is not a battlefield. I remember in 2015, talking to the parliamentarians at the during my proverbial throne speech, that what they ought to do is to throw away their political manifestos and adopt wholesale the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as in fact a genuine roadmap to national and regional development. Of course, I can tell you, if I may in fact be jocular here, some in fact were peeved at what I had to say, and remarkably, some didn't know what I was talking about. And that is why it is so important that we do not see ourselves as some kind of small island unto ourselves. We are no bubble. We are part of a greater world. And we, in fact, can influence the world at large through the power of our diversity, through the power of our oneness. And this is what I would like to see in Trinidad and Tobago in real terms. To give an example of what I speak of, because sometimes, you know, we speak because we have become a land of talkers, not necessarily a land of action. There is an implementation deficit in terms of policy, in terms of initiatives, in terms of our very humanity. I recall when I was president, I went to death row to visit prisoners on death row. I went to the youth training center where I met young men who were awaiting trial, some 60 for murder. And I sat with those young men and spoke with them for some 5-6 hours. Because under the sentencing regime of juveniles, they will come back into our society. So I needed to tell them that this president cares, that you are somebody, that don't let anyone make you feel you are nobody, that you have a place in our society. And that is what happens when, for example, you have divisiveness, when people are marginalized or feel isolated or feel not taken care of. They will respond negatively. And this is why, in fact, it is so important that leadership in any country must first and foremost be about service rather than power. And service leadership leads to sustainable peace in any country.
In our country, where we're not at war, we don't have a civil war, I just wonder, how does peace, and this is just a follow-up question, how would you, as a former president of Trinidad and Tobago, how would you say that we need to incorporate peace in our own country, whether it's through politics, whether it's through racial division? Where do you see that peace needs to seep in the most in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I will be blunt here. I am, in fact, simply disappointed that cult politics and identity politics are being promulgated in Trinidad and Tobago. In my 2015 address to the Parliament, I indicated that there is no place in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago for cult identity politics. There is no place in the Parliament for cult politics and identity politics. That it must never be a situation where I am more concerned about my party or doing something for my party or my party doing something for me. And the national interests and national objectives become subservient to political agendas and dogma. And this is why it is so important that we must not talk the talk, but walk the talk when it comes to inclusivity in diversity. Because the thing about it is that we need compassion, we need mercy, we need forgiveness. Do you hear leaders talking about that? Do you hear our leaders talking about the real power of love genuinely from their hearts? You know, and I'm not talking about public posturing. I am talking about how you deal with people on an individual basis and how you deal with people collectively. Because nobody is more important than the other person out there. Everyone is important and everyone deserves a chance to prosper.
Having spent your life, as I mentioned, working towards peace and the advocacy of peace in so many different nations, you mentioned a short while ago, you mentioned yourself that Israel is now connecting with different parts of the Middle East, things that have never been seen before. When you read those headlines, and it's been initiated by the United States government, what do you make of it?
Well, I am optimistic, but I am not totally confident that the peace agenda will sustain. I hope it does. Because I recall my days as a United Nations prosecutor in Den Haag, when I was an appeals counsel prosecuting camp commanders, generals, and politicians for war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. And I recall in the former Yugoslavia, people lived together as one. And because of internecine warfare and because of racial prejudice, everything exploded. And people were violated in the most egregious manner. As an appeals counsel, also, I had to deal with appeals coming out of Rwanda. And I recall, in fact, again, because of politicians, because of the media, you know, persons were encouraged to see each other along ethnic lines. I recall, in fact, we successfully prosecuted a Belgian journalist who was married to a Tutu woman for, in fact, creating mayhem, genocidal mayhem against the Tutsi population. He got about 12 years. So I am a very, very, very sensitive about the need for peace because, as you know, in fact, having been a former International Criminal Court judge, you know, I am very, very, very sensitive about the things that matter, that politicians and leaders of the world must not be ones that feel that they can get away with impunity. Because this is why I continue to also vouch for and advocate for greater participation of the International Criminal Court, because I've seen the benefits. And you know, the thing about peace is this, is that, you know, sometimes in fact things happen. Could you imagine, I remember in fact prosecuting an appeal of Commander Kornielach in the former Yugoslavia at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And he in fact ordered his troops to rape Muslim women, 200 to 300 Muslim women every night for 2 to 3 years in concentration camps, and played Chopin. And it's there the law developed to the point where in fact rape became as an aspect of genocide. So sometimes, you know, I always tell people, you know, that sometimes I feel as if I have been to hell and back, because I have seen in the most telling form man's inhumanity to man. You know.
I just wonder, what is your advice for Trinidad and Tobago? Where do we start, and what would be your advice in how we can move towards a more peaceful and just society?
Well, I've always believed in the power of generational responsibility. I think as adults, we need to appreciate that we do have an intragenerational responsibility to sustain a culture of peace in Trinidad and Tobago. I firmly believe that in the context, as I've been stating for many years, that in the curricula of our students, we ought to engage in a profound way at all levels of our education system the viable options of mediation and I said alternative conflict resolution, because we're not very good at resolving conflicts, you know. And in that regard, I think this is where leaders are also important. Leaders must be enablers of peace. They must be enablers of harmony. They must be enablers of order. They must be enablers of calm, of forgiveness, of compassion. And if in fact, for example, you have constant saber rattling as what obtains, we will continue to be some distance away from recognizing and realizing the ultimate peace that we seek. But I have hope. I have eternal hope, because as much as in fact that there are those, what I would refer to as the toxic few, that sometimes appear to be many because of their prominence and the prominence given to them by the media, I firmly believe that there are far more good people than bad. That there are wonderful, great people in Trinidad and Tobago with great philosophies and with great humanity. And I think we need, in fact, to source and give greater opportunity to those persons who are out there on the fringes. Because look at it, let's be honest. Have we really had a change in the commentators who appear on the radio, in the newspapers in the last 10 years? We need new ideas, we need fresh minds, we need young people to be integrated, and most important, we need a genuine empowerment of women in our society. Women, in fact, continue to be patronized in governance. And this we must stop. We must follow, in fact, the African Woman Empowerment and Gender 1968, because Africa recognized that there is a great nexus between woman empowerment and genuine economic sustainability and upliftment in our society. Look at, for example, in the context of persons with disabilities and persons with developmental problems. I recall my wife, in fact, when she was First Lady, indicating to the leaders at large in the Caribbean and in Trinidad that in order to ensure that persons who suffer from who are prone with disabilities, that we declare in the Caribbean, just as Africa had done, and just as the United Nations has done, a decade for persons with disabilities, a decade, so that we can in fact raise our level of social consciousness and awareness about the dilemma of those who are not able-bodied, who in fact are not mentally developed as others. And you know what happened? Everyone just in governance just says basically who she thinks she is. And that's the problem with good ideas in Trinidad and Tobago. When good ideas come from outside of the circle, it is seen as some kind of threat, as someone having some kind of agenda. When someone is genuine about moving the country forward. You see, we need to move away from the primitive politics that we engage in.
I want to ask you, many people's idea, quite rightly so, with regards to the International Day of Peace, is moving further away from war, especially the Middle East and war-torn countries, towards a more peaceful and just society. But here in Trinidad and Tobago, we too are grappling with several issues of communities that are plagued by gang warfare. Mr. President, how do we go about bringing peace to such hotspot communities?
There needs to be an institutional impact on same. And when I say institutional impact, do you know, for example, that there is a treaty called the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty? We were in fact trying our best some years back to have the headquarters here. Do you know, as much as in fact nations have signed on, there is no implementable enabling legislation that would assist in the fight against small arms and small arms. You know, and you'd recognize, for example, that this is an important feature in the fight against the trade in small arms. Because you speak of challenging communities. I went into a challenging community, namely death row. I spoke with men who in fact I prosecuted and sent to death row. I went to a place where I recall prosecuting for many, many years and sending some 30 men to death row, some of whom were hung. And I recall the first time that someone was hung, that I had prosecuted. I did the trial, I did the appeal, and I sent up my notes and arguments to the Privy Council, and he was sent, and the sentence of death was affirmed, and he was hung. And someone came to me a morning and said, "You must be happy, man." I said, "Happy about what?" He said, "You must be happy that man get hung." I said, "No, I'm not happy." I said, "Because that young man that we hung this morning was once an innocent babe in arms. How did he go from here, there, to there?" And that is why I have always been a proponent of a justice that heals, not a justice that bleeds. So that in the context, this is why, for example, if you do research, you will see, for example, I started something called the Bail Boys Project as a judge, where I was dealing with hardened criminals who had been in jail for 8 to 10 years with a series of crimes and who didn't get bail, who couldn't afford bail. And I decided to bite the bullet and grant them bail. I grant hardened criminals bail with conditionalities where, as I said, I didn't break the branch of the bail law. I bend the branches to the extent where, in fact, they were under curfew. I got a job. We got a job for them. Miss Frances Turton Long, she was the social worker involved in the project, did fantastic work. We also had psychologists deal with them if they would. We also, in fact, if they were illiterate, part of the bail condition was going, in fact, to literacy school. If, in fact, they were plumbers, part of the condition was that they would, in fact, do a course in plumbing to make them more marketable. The whole idea was to give them back a sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And I recall as a judge, the first thing I did before I granted them bail, I said, I wish to apologize on behalf of the judiciary, on behalf of the judicial system of Trinidad and Tobago, for keeping you in jail for 10 years without a trial. I am sorry. I am genuinely sorry, because that is wrong. Okay, do we walk around with a bag of salts on our back? No, what do we do about it? And this is how I arrested the problem. I am not for one moment saying that one or two did not fall through the cracks, but the majority ended up living sustainable lives to the point where there was one who in fact became a contractor, came to court and told me, he said, Judge, I want to bring some people who cannot get jobs from the prisons. I want to bring them into my contracting firm to help, because I believe in what is being done. And that is why, in fact, for example, I indicated that there is need for more connectivity between those in governance and those, in fact, who walk the streets of Trinidad and Tobago. Those who are in governance needs to appreciate, for example, that they are the servants of the people and the people are not their servants. Because when you look at how people are spoken to, you ask yourself, wait, is this how it's supposed to be? Is this how it's supposed to be in terms of, this is my representative and is this how he's talking to me? And when, for example, you go to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, you must become the representative of the people. All this backfighting and flinging insults must finish, because you are sending a bad example to the children of Trinidad and Tobago. And everybody, in fact, stays quiet. And everybody writes comments, but no one is prepared to bite the bullet and said, Mr. Minister, Mr. Opposition Member, you are wrong. Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Opposition Leader, you are wrong. And this is what we need. We need intelligent dialogue where people are prepared to say what needs to be said, do what needs to be done, and call persons to task to ensure that they always do the right thing.
Finally, what is your message to Trinidad and Tobago? Even I'll stretch that to the Caribbean on this International Day of Peace.
Well, I think, in fact, I could probably become a bit spiritual here and say that the devil is knocking on the doors of every single citizen. And some citizens are opening their doors. That we must have faith in doing good and being good. That when we do good and be good, it is not based on reciprocity. Because I always tell people all my life, I have followed what I call my platinum rule. Because I don't believe in the golden rule. Because the golden rule states, do unto others that they will have them do unto you. So it means that doing good is based on some kind of kickback you will get down the road, on some reciprocity. No, doing good must have no condition. And that is why I said the platinum rule, doing good and being good must be the ultimate. If good comes your way, fine. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And more importantly, I think it's important for us as citizens not to go down in the drain to join others. Because there are many people in a drain looking to pull others into that drain. Our job must be to go by the bank of the drain and pull them out, not join them. You know, another thing, for example, we must remove this vice that we have of this philosophy of victimology. I have noticed over the years that everyone feels he's a victim. The man at the top, he believes he's a victim of his success. The man in the middle, who is the average middle-class person, feels that he's been taken advantage by taxes. He pays all the bills. he pays the light bills, the water rates, he pays the road tax, he pays gas tax, and he's not getting a fair shake. And then the man at ground zero feels that he's a victim of the system. Whenever you have a society where every single facet of every demographic feels he or she is a victim, it speaks to a crisis in the leadership of this country. Because leadership must be encompassing, must be embracing. I am not for one moment saying that this, what I'm talking about, just happened today. You know, I have noticed this over the years, over the years, but we need in fact that human touch. We need that human touch, that veritable, as I've mentioned, in more ways than one. We need a trickle-down economics and a trickle-down humanity that remains sustainable, not one-off. We must stop being occasion persons, where in fact we simply come out for the big day and go back to our terrible ways the day after. We need to go beyond that as a people.
Mr. President, thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.